I never imagined that a simple family dinner would become the moment everything changed. There I sat at my parents' dining table, fork halfway to my mouth, when my mother, Patricia, delivered the blow that would shatter years of carefully maintained family dynamics. "Derek just bought a penthouse downtown while you still rent that tiny apartment," she announced with her signature disapproving tone. The entire table erupted in laughter. Uncle Frank chuckled about me being the family disappointment Aunt Linda suggested I find a rich husband to solve my problems, and my brother Derek smirked while scrolling through photos of his luxury home on his phone. The humiliation burned through my chest as I gripped my wine glass tighter, knowing a secret that would completely destroy their perception of reality forever. 3 hours earlier, I had been getting ready for our monthly family gathering, checking my phone for the usual stream of notifications from my property management app. Rental payments were coming in from my tenants across Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. The numbers looked good this month, though I noticed Derek's payment was scheduled for later in the week. I slipped my phone into my purse and drove to my parents' suburban Connecticut home, the same colonial where Derek and I had grown up competing for attention and approval. Walking through the front door, I was immediately greeted by the familiar chaos of extended family. My mother, Patricia, a 62-year-old perfectionist who ran her household like a corporate boardroom, was directing everyone to their assigned seats with military precision. My father, Robert, ever the peacekeeper, poured wine and made small talk about the weather. Derek stood by the fireplace with his girlfriend Madison, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator, with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent. Madison was practically glowing as she showed off her new engagement ring to anyone within a 5-foot radius. The diamond caught the light from my mother's chandelier, sending sparkles across the cream-colored walls. They had gotten engaged just 3 weeks ago, and Derek was basking in the congratulations and attention from our relatives. Uncle Frank, my father's younger brother, clapped Derek on the shoulder, while his wife Linda cooed over the wedding plans. As we settled around the mahogany dining table that had hosted countless family meals over the years, the conversation naturally turned to Derek's recent successes. His marketing firm had promoted him to senior account manager, complete with a salary bump and corner office. Madison chattered excitedly about their upcoming wedding scheduled for next spring and how they were planning to host the reception at Derek's new place. The Penthouse has the most incredible rooftop terrace. Madison gushed her hands, gesturing enthusiastically. Derek was beaming with pride as he described the floor-to-ceiling windows and marble countertops. Everyone listened with rapt attention as he painted a picture of luxury and success that made my modest rental apartment sound like a college dorm room by comparison. My mother, never one to miss an opportunity for comparison, turned her sharp gaze toward me. "And how are things going with your little property management hobby, Margie?" she asked with barely concealed condescension. The word hobby stung, because she knew perfectly well that my real estate investments were my full-time career, not some weekend side project. I managed 8 properties across 3 states, but somehow, in Patricia's mind, anything that didn't involve a traditional office job with business cards and expense accounts wasn't real work. Derek jumped into the conversation with enthusiasm that made my stomach clench. "Actually, Mom, I just closed on this amazing penthouse in downtown Hartford. 2 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, granite, everything, and a view that goes on for miles." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through photos, turning the screen toward the table so everyone could see. The marble work alone probably cost more than most people make in a year. Uncle Frank whistled appreciatively while Aunt Linda asked about square footage and property taxes. Derek rattled off numbers with confidence, describing his mortgage terms and down payment like he was reading from a financial textbook. He mentioned his excellent credit score and how the bank had approved his loan application without any complications. Meanwhile, I sat quietly cutting my pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces, knowing that every word coming out of Derek's mouth was a carefully constructed lie. He didn't own that penthouse. He had never owned any property in his entire life. What Derek had was a rental agreement with monthly payments that went directly into my business account because I was his landlord. 2 years ago, Derek had come to me desperate and embarrassed. His credit was a disaster from college mistakes and overspending in his 20s. He wanted to impress Madison and needed a prestigious address to match his professional image. Could he rent my newest investment property, a penthouse I had just renovated and furnished? He promised to pay on time every month and begged me not to tell the family because he wanted to handle his finances privately. I had agreed, thinking it was a temporary arrangement while Derek got his financial life together. But as months turned into years, Derek had become comfortable with the deception. To everyone else, he was the successful older brother who had made smart real estate investments. I was still the little sister who couldn't get her act together despite being 32 years old. The conversation continued swirling around Derek's supposed real estate acumen. My mother suggested that maybe Derek could give me some advice about building equity instead of throwing money away on rent. Madison nodded enthusiastically, adding that Derek had taught her so much about financial planning and investment strategies. Derek's phone buzzed on the table, and I caught a glimpse of the caller ID before he quickly flipped it face down. Building Management Hartford was calling, probably about the maintenance request I had submitted yesterday regarding a leaky faucet in the master bathroom. Derek excused himself from the table, claiming he needed to take an important call about homeowner responsibilities. As he stepped into the hallway, I could hear fragments of his conversation through the thin walls. Something about late fees and work orders. The family assumed he was handling routine property management issues that came with home ownership. They had no idea he was actually talking to my building management company about problems in his rental unit. I pulled out my phone discreetly and checked my property management app. Derek's rent payment due 3 days ago still showed as pending. The automatic withdrawal from his checking account had failed again, marking the 4th time in 6 months that he had been late with payment. Each time he called me with excuses about delayed bonuses or unexpected expenses, promising to catch up as soon as possible. The irony was suffocating. Here I was being lectured by my family about financial responsibility while my brother owed me money and lived in my property. Derek returned to the table looking slightly pale but quickly rejoined the conversation about his investment portfolio and future real estate plans. He suggested that maybe next year he might look into buying a second property, perhaps a vacation rental in the Hamptons. Uncle Frank raised his glass in a toast to Derek's success, and everyone followed suit except me. I lifted my wine glass mechanically, feeling like I was participating in my own humiliation. The lies were piling up so high that I wondered how Derek kept track of them all. How long could this charade continue before everything came crashing down? As dinner progressed, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could continue protecting Derek's image while enduring monthly doses of family criticism, or I could finally tell the truth and watch the carefully constructed fantasy crumble around us. The decision felt heavier than anything I had ever faced, because once the truth came out, there would be no going back to the way things were. The humiliation deepened when my cousin Sarah burst through the front door 45 minutes late as usual, dragging her new boyfriend Kyle behind her. Sarah worked as a nurse at Hartford Hospital and had always been the family gossip collecting information about everyone's personal lives like she was conducting research for a dissertation. "Sorry we're late," Sarah called out breathlessly, unwinding her scarf and kissing everyone's cheeks. Traffic was absolutely insane coming from the city. Kyle works downtown too, so we were just talking about how expensive real estate has gotten in that area. She turned toward Derek with bright, curious eyes. "Speaking of which, Mom told me you just bought a place downtown. That's so exciting." Patricia practically beamed with pride as she launched into a detailed recap of Derek's supposed real estate purchase. She'd obviously been waiting for another opportunity to brag about her successful son to anyone who would listen. "Derek owns a beautiful penthouse now," she announced, gesturing toward him like he was a prize she had won at the county fair. Kyle, who worked in commercial construction, immediately perked up with interest. "No kidding." "Which building? I've done work on several of those luxury developments over the past few years. The craftsmanship in those places is incredible, especially the ones with the custom millwork and imported fixtures." Derek's confidence faltered for just a moment before he recovered, rattling off the address and building details with practiced ease. He described the amenities package and building features like he had memorized them from a brochure, which he probably had. Kyle nodded appreciatively, asking technical questions about structural details and building systems that Derek deflected by claiming he wasn't too concerned with the behind-the-scenes mechanics. Sarah pulled out her phone and started looking up recent sales in the area, scrolling through real estate websites with the dedication of someone planning their own purchase. These places are going for $700,000 to over $1 million, depending on the floor and square footage, she mused aloud. Derek, you must be doing incredibly well at work to afford something like this. The comment hung in the air while Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Madison squeezed his hand supportively, clearly proud of her fiancé's financial success. My mother seized the opportunity to pull out a folder of printed real estate listings she had apparently prepared in advance, spreading them across the table like she was conducting a business presentation. I've been researching properties in Margie's price range, Patricia announced, sliding the papers toward me with barely concealed disappointment. Maybe seeing Derek's success will motivate her to finally make some smart financial decisions. These condos are much more reasonable, though of course they don't have the same amenities as Derek's building. The listings showed modest 2-bedroom condos in suburban developments, the kind of starter homes typically purchased by young couples or first-time buyers. The photos featured basic appliances and standard finishes, a stark contrast to the luxury features Derek had been describing. Uncle Frank leaned over to examine the papers, nodding thoughtfully as he compared price points and locations. Margie, you really should consider asking Derek for advice, Frank suggested with genuine helpfulness. He obviously knows how to navigate the real estate market and build equity instead of paying someone else's mortgage every month. Derek could probably recommend a good real estate agent or help you understand the financing process. Linda chimed in with her own observations about the importance of homeownership for building long-term wealth. She and Frank had purchased their house 30 years ago and watched it appreciate steadily over the decades. Derek's smart to get into the market while he's young, she said, smiling warmly at him. Property values in downtown Hartford are only going to increase, especially with all the development happening in that area. Derek was eating up the praise, describing his research process and how he had compared different neighborhoods before settling on his current location. He mentioned property tax rates and HOA fees, like he had been dealing with them for years instead of having me handle all the administrative details through my property management company. The conversation took a turn when Madison started discussing their wedding plans in more detail. She wanted to host the reception at the Penthouse, taking advantage of the rooftop terrace and panoramic city views. The space could easily accommodate 60 to 80 guests for cocktails and dancing. She explained excitedly, already envisioning string lights and elegant table settings against the backdrop of twinkling city lights. Patricia was absolutely thrilled by this development, clapping her hands together with delight. A penthouse wedding reception. How sophisticated and modern. She immediately started offering to help with planning and suggested that the family could contribute to decorating costs or catering expenses. The Penthouse would make such beautiful photographs for the wedding album. Derek's phone rang again, interrupting Madison's enthusiastic description of floral arrangements and seating charts. The caller ID displayed the same building management number from earlier, but this time Derek couldn't hide his panic quite as effectively. He declined the call and placed the phone face down on the table, trying to appear nonchalant. "Everything okay, honey?" Madison asked with concern. Derek forced a smile and claimed it was probably just routine building business, maybe something about upcoming maintenance or community meetings. But I noticed the thin sheen of sweat forming on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the dining room. The building management company was persistent, calling back within minutes. Derek finally excused himself again, claiming he needed to handle some urgent homeowner responsibilities that couldn't wait until tomorrow. The family continued chatting about wedding venues and real estate investments, while Derek stepped outside onto the back porch to take the call. Through the glass doors, I could see him pacing back and forth, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. His voice was too muffled to make out specific words, but his body language screamed stress and frustration. Kyle was asking Robert about property taxes and municipal services in different Hartford neighborhoods, completely unaware that Derek was probably being asked about overdue rent payments and maintenance issues he had no authority to address. When Derek returned to the table, his carefully maintained composure had cracked slightly around the edges. He apologized for the interruption and claimed there had been some confusion about HOA policies that required immediate clarification. Madison accepted his explanation without question, but I caught the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. Sarah, ever observant, noticed Derek's discomfort and asked if everything was all right with his new place. Derek assured everyone that home ownership came with occasional administrative headaches, but nothing too serious or complicated. He even managed a weak laugh as he described the learning curve of dealing with building management and community regulations. But I knew exactly what was happening. My property management company had probably been trying to reach Derek about his late rent payment and the pending maintenance request. They would have questions about authorization for repair work and timeline for payment processing. Derek had no answers because he wasn't the owner, just a tenant who'd been lying to everyone about his living situation. The weight of the secret was becoming unbearable. Every compliment Derek received felt like a personal attack on my integrity. Every piece of advice he dispensed about real estate investment was actually knowledge he had absorbed from our conversations when he first started renting from me. My family was treating him like a financial guru while dismissing my actual expertise in property management and real estate investment. I found myself studying Derek's face as he continued weaving his web of deception. How had we gotten to this point? When did protecting his image become more important than our relationship as siblings? The little boy who used to build blanket forts with me had grown into a man willing to throw me under the bus to maintain his facade of success. The evening was far from over, but I could already feel the tension building towards some kind of inevitable confrontation. Derek's lies were becoming more elaborate and harder to maintain, especially with Kyle asking technical questions and Sarah researching property values in real time. Madison was making wedding plans based on Derek's fictional ownership of my property, and my parents were using his supposed success as a measuring stick for my perceived failures. Something had to give, and I had a sinking feeling that when it did, the explosion would change our family dynamics forever. The question was whether I would be the one to light the fuse, or if Derek's carefully constructed house of cards would collapse under its own weight. The situation spiraled further out of control when Madison pulled out her tablet and started showing everyone her Pinterest boards for wedding reception ideas. She'd been collecting inspiration photos for months, creating elaborate mood boards with color schemes, lighting concepts, and table arrangements specifically designed for penthouse venues. "Look at this setup," Madison gushed, swiping through images of elegant rooftop receptions. The string lights create such a romantic atmosphere against the city skyline, and we could use the indoor space for cocktail hour before moving everyone outside for dinner and dancing. Derek didn't. "You say the terrace has those beautiful glass railings that won't block the view?" Derek nodded enthusiastically, describing architectural details he had memorized from my property listing photos. The space flowed perfectly from indoor to outdoor entertaining. He explained with French doors that opened completely to create one seamless area. He mentioned the built-in sound system and ambient lighting controls, like he had been operating them for years, instead of being a tenant who called me whenever something stopped working properly. Patricia was completely enchanted by the wedding plans, offering to research catering companies that specialized in upscale residential events. She suggested that maybe the family could pool resources to help cover some of the reception costs, treating it as an investment in Derek and Madison's future happiness. The Penthouse venue would save them thousands compared to traditional wedding venues. She calculated aloud, making it a smart financial decision, as well as a beautiful setting. Uncle Frank, warming up to the topic, started sharing stories about wedding receptions he had attended at luxury venues around New England. He compared different locations and amenities, praising Derek for having such a sophisticated space available for special occasions. Linda suggested that maybe Derek could host other family events at the Penthouse too, like anniversary parties or graduation celebrations. The conversation took an even more uncomfortable turn when Sarah announced that she and Kyle were also looking into buying their first place together. Kyle worked for a construction company that specialized in high-end residential projects, and he had valuable insights about building quality and long-term investment potential. Sarah turned to Derek with hopeful eyes, asking if he would mind sharing some advice about the home buying process. Derek, now fully committed to his role as the family real estate expert, launched into a detailed explanation of mortgage shopping and down payment strategies. He talked about credit scores and debt-to-income ratios, like he had personally navigated these challenges instead of being rejected for every loan application he had ever submitted. Madison listened proudly as her fiancé dispensed wisdom about property inspections and closing costs. Meanwhile, Kyle was asking increasingly specific questions about Derek's financing arrangements and purchase timeline. As someone who worked in construction, he understood the technical aspects of property development and building systems. He wanted to know about structural inspections, warranty coverage, and HOA financial statements. Derek deflected these questions by claiming his real estate agent and lawyer had handled most of the technical details. Patricia decided this was the perfect moment to pull out her phone and start researching real estate agents, for me scrolling through online reviews and professional profiles. "Maybe Derek's agent would be willing to work with you, Margie," she suggested with forced optimism. "Someone who specializes in luxury properties might have connections to more affordable options in good neighborhoods." The suggestion made Derek visibly uncomfortable since he obviously hadn't worked with any real estate agent at all. He claimed his agent was very selective about new clients and probably wouldn't be available for several months due to high demand. Madison supported this explanation, adding that really good agents in the luxury market were often booked solid with referrals and repeat customers. Robert, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, finally spoke up with a question that made everyone pause. "Derek, have you thought about getting a home equity line of credit? With property values rising in downtown Hartford, you might be sitting on some significant equity already. Could be useful for wedding expenses or future investments." The question hung in the air while Derek scrambled for an appropriate response. He couldn't admit that he had no equity in property he didn't actually own, but he also couldn't provide specific details about loans and refinancing options. He settled for claiming that he wanted to build more equity before considering additional borrowing, which sounded responsible, but avoided giving any concrete information. Madison, however, was intrigued by Robert's suggestion. She started researching home equity loans on her tablet, finding articles about leveraging real estate investments for major expenses like weddings or home improvements. Derek could probably qualify for a significant credit line, she mused, especially if the penthouse has appreciated since he bought it. This led to a broader discussion about real estate appreciation rates and market trends in Hartford. Kyle mentioned that downtown properties were benefiting from urban renewal projects and increased commercial development. Sarah found recent sales data showing that similar units in Derek's building had increased in value by 8 to 12% over the past year. Derek was trapped in an increasingly complex web of lies, forced to nod along with market analysis about property he didn't own and equity he couldn't access. Every new piece of information required him to elaborate on his deception, adding layers of fictional details about purchase prices, assessment values, and appreciation projections. The breaking point came when Madison casually mentioned that they should probably update Derek's homeowner's insurance policy to include coverage for wedding events. She had been researching liability requirements for private parties, wanting to make sure they were properly protected if guests were injured during the reception. Derek would need to contact his insurance agent about temporary coverage expansion and additional liability limits. Derek's face went completely pale as he realized he had no homeowner's insurance to update because he wasn't a homeowner at all. He stammered something about needing to review his existing policy documents before making any changes, buying himself time to figure out how to handle this latest complication. Madison offered to help him research insurance options since she had experience with policy comparisons through her marketing work. Patricia, sensing that Derek might need financial assistance with wedding planning, offered to co-sign for a home equity loan if his income wasn't sufficient to qualify for the amount they needed. She was so proud of his property investment that she was willing to put her own credit on the line to help fund his wedding expenses. Robert agreed that families should support each other during major life events, especially when Derek had been so responsible about building assets and planning for the future. The generosity and trust my parents were showing Derek based on his elaborate lies made my stomach turn. They were willing to risk their own financial security to support what they thought was Derek's continued success, never imagining that he had been deceiving them about every aspect of his supposed real estate investment. Derek's phone buzzed again with another call from building management, but this time he declined it immediately without even looking at the screen. Madison noticed his jumpiness and asked if there was something wrong with the property management company. Derek claimed they had been having issues with administrative efficiency lately, calling about routine matters that could easily be handled through email or the building's online portal. Kyle found this explanation puzzling since professional property management companies usually prided themselves on streamlined communication and customer service. He had worked with several management firms during construction projects and found them to be highly organized and responsive. Madison agreed that excessive phone calls seemed unusual for a well-run building operation. The scrutiny was becoming unbearable for Derek, who was running out of plausible explanations for increasingly obvious inconsistencies in his story. He kept checking his phone nervously, probably worried about more calls or messages that would expose his deception. The confident, successful persona he had been projecting was starting to crack under the weight of maintaining so many interconnected lies. I realized that Derek was probably hoping the evening would end before anyone dug too deeply into the details of his fictional real estate empire. But my family was energized by the topic, excited about wedding planning and investment strategies. They wanted to explore every angle of Derek's supposed success, asking questions that required specific knowledge only a real property owner would possess. The tension was building towards something explosive, and I found myself caught between protecting Derek's secret and defending my own reputation. How long could I sit quietly while my family used his lies to justify their disappointment in me? At what point did loyalty to Derek become betrayal of my own self-respect and professional achievements? The evening reached a new level of absurdity when Madison pulled out her wedding planning binder, a meticulously organized collection of vendor information budget spreadsheets and timeline charts that she had been developing since Derek proposed. She flipped to a section marked Venue Details and started reading aloud from her notes about hosting requirements for private residential events. According to my research, Madison announced with the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time on wedding websites, we'll need to notify the building management about the reception at least 60 days in advance. They'll probably require additional insurance coverage and might have restrictions about noise levels or guest capacity for evening events. Derek shifted uncomfortably as Madison continued outlining the administrative requirements for hosting a wedding reception in his supposed penthouse. She mentioned security deposits, vendor access protocols, and cleanup obligations that would typically be handled through building management coordination with the unit owner. Every detail she recited represented another potential exposure point for Derek's deception. Patricia was taking notes on her phone, volunteering to help coordinate with the building management office to ensure all requirements were properly handled. She offered to make the initial contact calls since Derek was obviously busy with work responsibilities and wedding planning. Madison gratefully accepted the help, explaining that her own schedule at the marketing firm was completely packed through the holidays. This generous offer sent Derek into barely concealed panic mode. He couldn't let his mother call my property management company and discover that he was listed as a tenant rather than an owner. He quickly claimed that building management preferred to work directly with residents for event planning, citing privacy policies and liability concerns that made third-party communication complicated. Uncle Frank found this explanation suspicious since most professional management companies were accustomed to working with family members and event planners for major celebrations. His own condo association had handled similar situations without any bureaucratic complications. Linda agreed that Derek's building seemed unusually restrictive compared to other luxury residential developments they knew about. The conversation was interrupted when Kyle received a work call about a construction emergency at one of his current projects. While he stepped outside to handle the situation, Sarah took advantage of his absence to pepper Derek with more detailed questions about his home buying experience. She wanted specific information about loan officers, inspection companies, and closing attorneys that might be useful for her own property search. Derek provided vague answers about working with professionals whose names he couldn't quite remember, claiming that his real estate agent had coordinated most of the details directly. Sarah found this unusual since most first-time homebuyers were heavily involved in every aspect of the purchase process. She had been researching the topic extensively and expected to be much more hands-on with vendor selection and timeline management. Madison supported Derek's explanation by mentioning how stressful the whole process had been for him. She described his relief at finding professionals who could handle the complicated paperwork and coordination requirements without requiring constant input from the buyer. Derek had been so focused on work commitments that he really needed agents who could manage most of the transaction independently. This narrative bothered Sarah, who worked in healthcare and understood the importance of personal involvement in major financial decisions. She questioned whether Derek had been sufficiently protected during the purchase process, worrying that excessive delegation might have exposed him to unnecessary risks or unfavorable terms. Sarah suggested that Derek review all his closing documents to ensure he understood every aspect of his mortgage and ownership obligations. The suggestion terrified Derek, who obviously possessed no closing documents to review. He claimed that all his paperwork was stored in a safety deposit box at the bank, making it inconvenient to access for casual review. Madison mentioned that they should probably organize all their important documents before the wedding, creating a comprehensive filing system for their shared financial records. Patricia offered to help with document organization, volunteering her services as someone who had managed complex financial records throughout her career in corporate administration. She could create a tracking system for property documents, insurance policies, and investment records that would serve Derek and Madison well throughout their marriage. The offer was well-intentioned, but represented another potential disaster for Derek's carefully maintained deception. Kyle returned from his work call with disturbing news about construction delays and budget overruns at his current project. The conversation shifted toward general concerns about contractor reliability and project management in the construction industry. Kyle mentioned that even luxury residential developments sometimes experience quality control issues and warranty problems that buyers discovered months or years after closing. This prompted Derek to claim that his building had excellent construction quality and responsive maintenance services, despite his recent difficulties with late rent payments and repair requests. He described fictional interactions with building staff and management personnel, creating elaborate stories about responsive customer service and proactive property maintenance that bore no resemblance to his actual experience as my tenant. Madison was impressed by Derek's positive relationship with building management, comparing it favorably to horror stories she'd heard about unresponsive property managers and delayed maintenance requests. She suggested that good management was worth premium HOA fees since responsive service protected property values and resident satisfaction over the long term. The conversation took another dangerous turn when Sarah announced that she and Kyle were planning to attend an open house tour the following weekend. Several luxury developments in Hartford were hosting simultaneous events to showcase available units and amenities. Sarah wondered if Derek's building would be participating, since it would be interesting to see comparable properties and pricing in the same neighborhood. Derek claimed he wasn't sure about his building's participation in the tour, suggesting that established developments with low vacancy rates might not need to participate in general marketing events. Madison thought this made sense, since Derek's building was obviously desirable enough to maintain full occupancy without additional promotion. The explanation sounded plausible, but added another layer of fictional detail that Derek would need to remember and maintain. Robert, who had been quietly observing the conversation, asked Derek about his long-term real estate investment strategy. Was he planning to hold the penthouse as a primary residence for several years, or might he consider upgrading to a larger property if his career continued advancing? The question required Derek to articulate financial planning concepts he had never actually implemented in his own life. Derek claimed he was focused on building equity and stability before considering additional real estate moves. He mentioned wanting to establish a strong foundation with his current property before exploring investment opportunities or geographic relocation. Madison supported this conservative approach, praising Derek's patience and long-term thinking about financial planning and wealth building. The praise felt particularly galling because Derek had never demonstrated patience or long-term thinking about anything in his entire life. His financial history was a series of impulsive decisions, missed payments, and emergency borrowing that had destroyed his credit score and forced him to rent from me under false pretenses. Yet here he was being celebrated as a model of financial responsibility and strategic planning. Patricia suggested that Derek might consider real estate investment seminars or professional development courses that could enhance his knowledge of property management and market analysis. She had read about successful investors who built substantial portfolios through systematic education and careful market research. Derek could potentially become a real estate entrepreneur if he continued developing his expertise in the field. The suggestion was ironically appropriate since Derek actually needed extensive education about real estate investment property management and financial planning. But instead of acknowledging his knowledge gaps, he was pretending to possess expertise he had never developed. Madison was already researching investment seminars and continuing education programs that might benefit Derek's career development and financial planning skills. As the evening progressed, Derek's deception was becoming increasingly elaborate and unsustainable. Every new detail he provided created additional opportunities for exposure and contradiction. His family's genuine interest in his supposed success was forcing him to construct an ever more complex web of lies that would inevitably collapse under scrutiny. I could see the sweat beading on Derek's forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the dining room. His confident facade was cracking under the pressure of maintaining so many interconnected deceptions simultaneously. The phone calls from building management were becoming more frequent and urgent, probably because my property management company needed to discuss his overdue rent payment and pending maintenance authorization. The breaking point was approaching rapidly, and I realized that Derek's house of cards was about to collapse, whether I intervened or not. The question was whether I would take control of the narrative or let the truth emerge through his inevitable mistakes and contradictions. The moment I had been dreading finally arrived when Madison's tablet chimed with a calendar reminder about their upcoming appointment with a wedding photographer. She wanted to schedule an engagement photo session at Derek's penthouse, taking advantage of the dramatic city views and elegant interior design for their wedding website and save the date cards. "We should probably do the shoot during golden hour," Madison explained enthusiastically, scrolling through photography portfolios on her tablet. "The natural light coming through those floor-to-ceiling windows will be absolutely stunning, especially with the city skyline in the background. Derek, what time does the sun hit your living room in the evening?" Derek fumbled for an answer about lighting conditions and sunset timing, clearly uncomfortable, with questions about details a real resident would know instinctively. He claimed that the western exposure provided beautiful natural light throughout the afternoon and early evening, though he wasn't entirely sure about specific timing since he was usually at work during those hours. This explanation puzzled Madison, who had visited the penthouse several times for dinner and weekend dates. She distinctly remembered watching the sunset from the terrace during their romantic evenings together, and Derek's uncertainty about lighting patterns seemed strange for someone who supposedly lived there every day. Sarah noticed the inconsistency too, commenting that most people were very familiar with how natural light moved through their own living spaces. The situation became more complicated when Madison suggested they schedule a walkthrough with the photographer the following week to plan specific shot locations and discuss equipment requirements. Professional photographers often needed advance access to venues for lighting tests and setup planning, especially for luxury residential shoots that required specialized equipment and careful staging. Derek tried to deflect by claiming that building security policies might restrict photographer access for advance visits, but Madison had already researched this aspect thoroughly. Most luxury buildings accommodated professional photographers for resident events, requiring only advance notice and vendor insurance verification. She offered to handle all the coordination through building management since she had experience with vendor relations through her marketing work. The offer sent Derek into visible panic since he couldn't allow Madison to contact my property management company about photography permissions. He quickly claimed that he preferred to handle all building communications, personally citing privacy concerns and his existing relationship with management staff. Madison found this controlling behavior unusual, since Derek typically appreciated her help with administrative tasks and event coordination. Patricia, sensing tension between the engaged couple, tried to lighten the mood by suggesting that maybe the whole family could participate in some of the engagement photos. Holiday cards featuring Derek and Madison at their beautiful penthouse would be such a lovely way to announce the engagement to extended family and friends. She was already envisioning formal portraits against the city skyline backdrop Derek had described so eloquently. Uncle Frank enthusiastically supported this idea, mentioning that his company's holiday party was coming up, and he would love to show off photos of Derek's success to his colleagues. Linda suggested that maybe Derek could host a family gathering at the Penthouse during the holidays, combining celebration of his new home with engagement festivities and seasonal traditions. These suggestions created a cascade of logistical problems for Derek, who couldn't host family events at property he didn't actually own. He stammered excuses about holiday travel plans and work commitments that would make hosting difficult during the busy season. Madison looked confused by Derek's reluctance to share their beautiful space with family members who clearly wanted to celebrate their happiness. The conversation was interrupted by Derek's phone ringing again with the same persistent building management number. This time, he couldn't ignore the call without appearing rude or irresponsible to his assembled family members. He answered with forced cheerfulness, claiming to expect a routine update about building maintenance or community announcements. But the conversation I could overhear through Derek's inadequate attempts at privacy was obviously about overdue rent payments and authorization for emergency repairs. The building management representative was asking about payment timeline and whether Derek had authority to approve expensive plumbing work in the master bathroom. Derek's responses were evasive and contradictory, clearly confusing the person on the other end of the line. Madison was paying close attention to Derek's side of the conversation, noticing his defensive tone and apparent confusion about building policies and procedures. As someone who worked in customer service through her marketing position, she recognized the signs of someone who wasn't familiar with standard administrative processes they should have understood completely. When Derek ended the call, Madison asked directly about the nature of the building management issue. Derek claimed there had been some confusion about maintenance scheduling and vendor access, but his explanation lacked the specific details someone would typically possess about problems in their own home. Madison's expression showed growing concern about Derek's evasive responses and apparent discomfort with routine homeowner responsibilities. Sarah, whose nursing background had taught her to notice inconsistencies and warning signs, asked Derek why he seemed so stressed about normal property management issues. Most homeowners developed comfortable working relationships with building staff and management companies, especially in luxury developments that prided themselves on customer service and resident satisfaction. Derek's attempt to explain his apparent conflict with building management only created more questions and contradictions. He claimed that recent staff changes had disrupted established communication patterns, requiring him to rebuild relationships with new management personnel who weren't familiar with his preferences and requirements. The explanation sounded plausible, but didn't account for his obvious anxiety about routine interactions. Kyle, who had extensive experience with property management companies through his construction work, found Derek's description of management problems highly unusual. Professional management firms typically maintain detailed records and communication protocols that prevented the kind of confusion Derek was describing. Even with staff turnover established, residents shouldn't experience significant disruption in service delivery or administrative processes. The scrutiny was becoming unbearable for Derek, who was running out of credible explanations for increasingly obvious problems with his story. His confident persona had completely evaporated, replaced by nervous energy and defensive responses that only highlighted the inconsistencies in his narrative. Madison was watching him with growing concern, clearly troubled by his strange behavior and evasive answers. Robert decided to intervene with a practical suggestion that inadvertently created another crisis for Derek. "Why don't you just introduce Madison to your building management team?" he proposed reasonably. "Since you're getting married, she'll probably need access to building services and communication channels anyway. Most management companies are happy to add authorized contacts for resident accounts." The suggestion made perfect sense for an engaged couple planning to share a residence, but it represented a complete disaster for Derek's deception. He couldn't authorize Madison's access to my property management account because he wasn't the account holder, just a tenant with limited privileges and overdue rent payments. He stammered excuses about privacy policies and administrative complications that would make such authorization difficult or impossible. Madison was becoming genuinely upset by Derek's refusal to include her in basic homeowner responsibilities and building relationships. As his fiancée, she expected to be integrated into all aspects of his life, including routine administrative matters and property management. Derek's secretive behavior about his own home was creating doubt about their relationship communication and shared decision-making. Patricia tried to mediate the growing tension by suggesting that maybe Derek was just overwhelmed by wedding planning stress and work pressures. She encouraged Madison to be patient with administrative details that could easily be handled after the holidays when everyone had more time and energy for paperwork and coordination tasks. But Madison wasn't satisfied with vague explanations and continued evasion about basic relationship integration issues. She had been planning their future together based on Derek's financial stability and property ownership, making major life decisions that depended on his honesty about their shared resources and living arrangements. Derek's behavior was undermining her confidence in everything she thought she knew about their relationship foundation. The evening had reached a crisis point where Derek's deception was no longer sustainable under increasingly direct questioning and logical scrutiny. His family's genuine interest in his supposed success had created a trap of expectations and assumptions that were impossible to maintain without access to actual ownership documentation and legitimate management relationships. I realized that Derek was probably hoping desperately for some kind of interruption or distraction that would allow him to escape further questioning about his fictional real estate empire. But my family was too engaged and invested in the topic to let inconsistencies slide without resolution. The truth was going to emerge whether Derek was prepared for it or not. The moment of truth arrived when Madison's patience finally ran out. She set down her tablet with decisive force and looked Derek directly in the eyes with the kind of expression that demanded complete honesty. "Derek, I need you to explain what's really going on here," she said firmly. "Your behavior tonight has been completely unlike you, and I'm tired of getting evasive answers about your own home." The entire table fell silent as Madison continued her confrontation. "You're acting like you don't know basic information about where you live. You're avoiding my questions about building management, and you won't let me help with simple administrative tasks that any couple would handle together. What exactly are you hiding from me?" Derek's face went completely white as he realized his carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. He tried to maintain his composure, claiming that Madison was overreacting to routine property management issues and work-related stress. But his voice was shaking, and everyone at the table could see that he was desperately trying to avoid a direct confrontation about increasingly obvious inconsistencies. Patricia attempted to intervene, suggesting that maybe everyone was overthinking simple communication problems that could be resolved with patience and understanding. But Madison wasn't backing down from her demand for honest answers about Derek's living situation and financial arrangements. She had invested too much in their relationship to accept continued deception about fundamental aspects of their shared future. Uncle Frank, whose business experience had taught him to recognize financial deception and professional misrepresentation, was studying Derek with growing suspicion. The nervous energy defensive responses and obvious discomfort with basic homeowner questions were creating a pattern that suggested serious problems beneath the surface of Derek's supposed success story. Kyle returned to the conversation with his construction industry perspective on property management relationships and building operations. In my experience, he said thoughtfully, homeowners develop pretty comfortable relationships with management staff, especially in luxury buildings where customer service is a major selling point. Derek seems unusually stressed about routine interactions that should be straightforward and professional. Sarah was nodding in agreement, her nursing background having taught her to notice behavioral inconsistencies that might indicate underlying problems. Derek's anxiety about normal property management communication seemed disproportionate unless there were complications he wasn't discussing openly with family members who genuinely wanted to support and celebrate his achievements. Madison pulled out her phone and announced her intention to call Derek's building management company directly to introduce herself and ask about procedures for adding authorized contacts to resident accounts. This was standard practice for engaged couples, and she was tired of Derek's evasive explanations about privacy policies and administrative complications that didn't make logical sense. Derek's panic was now completely visible to everyone at the table. He grabbed Madison's hand and begged her not to make the call, claiming that timing was inappropriate and building management offices were probably closed for the evening anyway. Madison pointed out that many luxury buildings maintain 24-hour emergency contact numbers and could provide basic information about administrative procedures even outside normal business hours. Robert suggested that maybe Derek should just provide Madison with the building management contact information so she could call during regular business hours later in the week. This reasonable compromise would address Madison's concerns while respecting Derek's preferences about communication timing and professional courtesy protocols. But Derek couldn't provide accurate contact information because he wasn't dealing with building management as an owner. All his interactions went through my property management company as a tenant, and his account showed overdue rent payments and pending maintenance authorizations that would immediately expose his deception if Madison made direct contact. Linda, who had been quietly observing the growing tension, asked Derek directly why he seemed so reluctant to share basic information about his own property with his fiancée. Most engaged couples discussed financial arrangements and living situations openly, especially when planning a wedding and making major life decisions together. Derek's secretive behavior was creating unnecessary conflict and confusion about routine relationship integration. Madison was becoming genuinely angry about Derek's continued evasion and apparent dishonesty about fundamental aspects of their relationship. She accused him of treating their engagement like a casual dating arrangement instead of a committed partnership based on trust, transparency, and shared decision-making. Derek's behavior was undermining everything she thought they had built together over the past 2 years. Patricia was growing concerned about the conflict between Derek and Madison, worried that family dinner had somehow triggered serious relationship problems that might affect their wedding plans and future happiness. She suggested that maybe private conversation would be more appropriate for resolving personal disagreements that didn't necessarily involve the entire extended family. But Madison refused to be dismissed or redirected from her demand for honest answers about Derek's living situation and financial status. She had made major life decisions based on Derek's representations about his professional success and property ownership, and she deserved to know the truth about their actual circumstances and resources. Derek tried one last desperate attempt to deflect Madison's questions by claiming that building management had been dealing with legal issues related to construction defects and warranty disputes that made communication complicated and potentially problematic for residents. He suggested that direct contact might interfere with ongoing litigation or insurance claims that required careful handling by property management professionals. Kyle immediately challenged this explanation based on his extensive construction industry experience. Legal issues related to building defects would typically increase communication between management and residents, not restrict it. Affected homeowners would usually receive detailed updates about litigation progress and potential settlements that might benefit their individual property values and warranty coverage. The explanation was obviously fabricated, and everyone at the table could see that Derek was running out of credible excuses for his strange behavior and defensive responses. Madison was staring at him with a mixture of disappointment and anger that suggested their relationship was approaching a serious crisis point based on his apparent dishonesty about fundamental issues. Sarah decided to cut through Derek's elaborate explanations with a direct question that demanded a simple, factual response. "Derek," she said clearly, "do you actually own the penthouse you've been describing to us tonight, or is there something else going on that you haven't told us?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Derek's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound as he struggled to find an answer that wouldn't completely destroy his carefully maintained deception. Madison was watching him intently, clearly recognizing that his response would determine the future of their relationship and engagement. I realized that this was the moment when everything would finally come out into the open. Derek had reached the end of his ability to maintain his elaborate fiction, and his family's persistent questions had backed him into a corner where the truth was the only remaining option. The explosion was going to happen whether I participated or not, but I could choose whether to control the narrative or let Derek's confession shape everyone's understanding of what had really been happening. My heart was pounding as I prepared to finally reveal the secret I had been protecting for 2 years, knowing that my words would change our family dynamics forever. Derek's lies were about to be exposed, but I could determine how the truth emerged and what lessons everyone would learn from this painful revelation about honesty, success, and family relationships. I took a deep breath and decided that enough was enough. The lies had gone too far, and watching my family tear apart Derek and Madison's relationship over deception I had enabled was more than I could bear. I set down my wine glass and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Derek doesn't own that penthouse," I announced calmly. "He's been renting it from me for the past 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop as my words sank into the minds of everyone around the table. Madison's face went through a series of emotions, from confusion to realization to absolute fury. Patricia's mouth fell open in shock, her confident expression crumbling as she tried to process what I had just revealed. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, his carefully constructed image evaporating in an instant. Uncle Frank leaned back in his chair with a low whistle, while Linda's eyes darted between Derek and me as if she were watching a tennis match. Sarah grabbed Kyle's arm, her eyes wide with the kind of amazement people show when they witness a car accident happening in slow motion. Madison was the first to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What did you just say?" I pulled out my phone and opened my property management app, turning the screen toward the table so everyone could see Derek's name listed as a tenant in my real estate portfolio. He's been renting the penthouse from me since September 2 years ago. Here's his rental history, including the payment that's currently 3 days overdue. Patricia stared at the phone screen like it was written in a foreign language she couldn't understand. "But that's impossible," she stammered. "Derek bought that penthouse. He told us all about the mortgage and the down payment and the closing process." "None of that was true, Mom," I replied gently but firmly. "Derek has never owned any property in his life. His credit score has been too damaged from college debt and financial mistakes to qualify for a mortgage. When he wanted to impress Madison with a prestigious address, he came to me and asked if he could rent my newest investment property." Derek finally found his voice, though it was shaky and desperate. "Margie, please don't do this. You promised you wouldn't tell anyone about our arrangement. This is between us, not the whole family." Madison whirled around to face Derek with eyes blazing with betrayal and anger. "You've been lying to me for 2 years about where you live, about your financial situation, about everything." She pulled off her engagement ring and set it on the table with a sharp click that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. Derek reached for her hand, but she pulled away from his touch. "Madison, let me explain. I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," Madison shot back, her voice rising with each word. "You've been pretending to be someone you're not, lying about your success and making me look like a fool for believing in you. How could you do this to me, to us?" Robert was staring at me with a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. "Margie, are you saying that you own real estate investment properties? That you're Derek's landlord?" I nodded, feeling years of hidden truth finally coming to light. "I own 8 properties across Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. I've been building my real estate investment portfolio for the past 8 years, starting with a small duplex I bought right after college. The penthouse Derek has been living in is my newest acquisition. I renovated and furnished it specifically for high-end rental income." Patricia looked like she was having trouble breathing as the implications of my revelation sank in. "You mean while we've been criticizing Margie for not being successful enough, she's actually been Derek's landlord this entire time?" Kyle was shaking his head in amazement. "So when Derek was giving advice about real estate investment and property management, he was actually just repeating information he learned from Margie." "That's exactly right," I confirmed. "Derek has been renting from me while pretending to own property he could never afford to purchase. Every piece of financial wisdom he shared tonight came from conversations we had when he first moved in and needed help understanding lease terms and building policies. Uncle Frank was doing mental calculations about property values and rental income. Margie, if you own 8 properties in those markets, you must be generating substantial monthly income from your investments. Why haven't you told us about your business success?" "Because Derek asked me not to," I explained sadly. "He was embarrassed about his financial situation and wanted time to get back on his feet before telling the family the truth about our arrangement. I thought I was being a supportive sister by protecting his privacy and dignity." Madison was staring at Derek like she was seeing a complete stranger. "Everything you told me about your success, your investments, your financial planning, it was all lies. The mortgage payments you complained about, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, none of that was real." Derek's attempts to explain or justify his deception only made things worse. He talked about wanting to provide stability and security for their relationship, about being embarrassed by his past financial mistakes, about hoping to eventually buy property for real and make the lies retroactively true. But with each word, Madison looked more disgusted and disappointed. Sarah was processing the family dynamics, implications of the revelation. So when Mom has been criticizing Margie for not being successful, like Derek, she's actually been criticizing the person who owns the property Derek has been pretending to own. Patricia looked absolutely mortified as she realized how wrong she had been about both her children's situations. "Margie, I owe you such a tremendous apology. I've been comparing you unfavorably to Derek when you've actually been the successful one this entire time. How could I have been so blind and judgmental?" The conversation continued as family members processed the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about Derek and me. Madison gathered her things and announced that she needed time to think about whether their relationship could survive such fundamental dishonesty about basic facts and financial status. Derek's pleas for forgiveness and promises to change fell on deaf ears as she walked out the door without looking back. In the aftermath of Madison's departure, Derek finally broke down and admitted to the full scope of his financial problems. He owed money on multiple credit cards, had defaulted on student loans, and had been borrowing money from our parents under false pretenses for months. The successful professional image he projected was completely fictional, maintained through elaborate lies and financial help he was too proud to acknowledge honestly. Patricia turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Margie, can you ever forgive me for treating you so unfairly? I've been such a terrible mother, criticizing your achievements while praising lies and deception. You've built something incredible with your real estate business, and I've been too blind to see it." Robert asked detailed questions about my investment strategy and business operations, genuinely impressed by the portfolio I had built through careful planning and smart financial decisions. Uncle Frank wanted to know about market analysis and property selection criteria, recognizing expertise he had completely overlooked. Linda apologized for participating in family criticism that was based on completely inaccurate information about our relative success and financial stability. As the evening wound down, Derek committed to complete honesty about his financial situation and agreed to move out of my penthouse into an apartment he could actually afford with his real income. He would tell the truth to Madison and hope that their relationship might eventually recover from the foundation of lies he had built around his false identity. Patricia asked how she could support my real estate business and make amends for years of unfair criticism and comparison. I suggested that maybe our family could focus on celebrating individual achievements rather than ranking success according to conventional markers like traditional job titles or relationship status. Robert offered to refer potential clients to my property management services, recognizing that I had developed professional expertise worthy of respect and promotion. Over the following weeks, Madison eventually agreed to speak with Derek about rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of complete honesty and realistic expectations. She ended their engagement but remained open to dating again if Derek could prove that he had learned from his mistakes and committed to truthful communication about all aspects of his life and finances. Derek moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment that fit his actual budget and began working with a financial counselor to address his debt problems and credit issues systematically. He apologized to Madison and our family for the deception and manipulation that had damaged relationships and created false expectations about his capabilities and achievements. Patricia became one of my biggest supporters, referring friends to my property management services and bragging about my business success to anyone who would listen. She learned valuable lessons about making assumptions and comparisons without understanding the complete picture of someone's life and accomplishments. Robert helped me research expansion opportunities for my real estate portfolio and offered to review legal documents when I was considering new property purchases. The family Christmas party ended up being held at my own home, rather than Derek's former penthouse rental, giving everyone a chance to see the beautiful property I had purchased and renovated with my own investment capital and design expertise. The gathering became a celebration of honesty, authenticity, and recognition of diverse paths to personal and professional success. I learned that protecting someone else's lies often requires sacrificing your own truth and dignity. Real family support means encouraging honesty and celebrating authentic achievements rather than maintaining comfortable fictions that damage relationships and self-respect. Success comes in many forms, and comparing superficial markers often misses the deeper story of someone's actual accomplishments and character. The experience taught our entire family about the importance of questioning assumptions and supporting each other's real journeys, rather than idealized versions that match our expectations or prejudices. Derek eventually rebuilt his relationship with Madison based on complete honesty about his struggles and genuine commitment to financial responsibility and personal growth. Years later, Derek successfully purchased his first property with legitimate financing and his own down payment, having learned valuable lessons about building real success through patience, hard work, and honest communication with the people who matter most in his life. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone else's lies and standing up for your own truth? How do you think families should handle situations where success is measured by appearances rather than actual achievements? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding the courage to speak your truth. Share this with someone who might need to hear that authentic success is always better than borrowed prestige, no matter how impressive the facade might appear. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your real accomplishments, no matter how unconventional they might seem to others, deserve recognition and respect from the people who truly matter in your life.